From the frozen towers of Chernobyl in Ukraine to the floating ruins of Dubai's world islands, from the Pyramiden ghost town in the Arctic to the sinking concrete of Forest City in Malaysia, I'm about to take you on a journey through 25 of the most spectacular abandoned places on Earth. Picture this: 700 identical Disney-style castles rotting in a Turkish valley, a 105-story pyramid hotel in North Korea that has never hosted a single guest, an unfinished nuclear reactor in Cuba, sitting silent under the Caribbean sun, the world's biggest excavator, abandoned in the middle of the South Sudanese desert, now serving as a rusting monument to a dream that died in civil war. These aren't just buildings, they're monuments to human ambition gone catastrophically wrong. We're talking about mega projects that cost more than entire countries make in a year. Projects that were supposed to reshape nations, power continents, or house millions of people. Instead, they became expensive graveyards scattered across 6 continents. By the end of this journey, you'll see how Venezuela's Tower of David became a vertical slum, why Bataan nuclear plant in the Philippines is now a tourist attraction, and how the NSA's abandoned spy station in Berlin turned into a graffiti-covered playground for urban explorers. But here's what's truly terrifying. Some of these disasters are happening right now in 2025. While you were sleeping last night, more money was probably being wasted on new mega projects that will eventually join this list. Ready to explore these architectural nightmares? From the deserts of Kazakhstan to the rainforests of Brazil, we're about to witness the most expensive mistakes in human history. Let's begin our tour of the world's most spectacular ruins, starting with Burj Al Baba's Turkey, the Disney Disaster Valley. Picture this: a valley that looks like Hollywood's version of medieval Europe got hit by a tornado and never cleaned up. Welcome to Burj Al Babas, where 732 identical Disney castles stand rotting in the Turkish countryside like a fever dream that went horribly wrong. If you've ever wanted to live in Disneyland but woke up in a nightmare, this is your place. Picture spending $500,000 on a castle. Now imagine doing that 732 times and then nothing. The developer Abdurrahman Antakyala wasn't just building homes. He was building an empire of fairy tale clones. Each castle came complete with fake moats, Gothic windows, and pointy spires that could pierce the sky. We're talking about a place where every house looks like it belongs in a Disney movie. Except these castles are concrete shells, swallowing tourists' dreams. Here's the gut punch statistic. 366 million, that's how much money disappeared into this Turkish version of Disneyland. Enough cash to feed a small country's population for years, spent on creating the world's most expensive Halloween decorations. But here's where it gets interesting, folks. This isn't just about failed real estate. This is about human resilience in the face of catastrophic mistakes. The locals didn't just sit around crying over wasted castles. Some started using the abandoned structures as makeshift farms. Others turned them into Instagram hotspots, charging tourists for fairy tale selfies. Talk about making lemonade out of lemons. The developer went bankrupt in 2018, leaving behind a concrete wonderland that some call beautiful and others call bizarre. Locals now call it Sultan Süleyman's Palace, though we bet even historical sultans would ask for their money back. Now, if you think 732 empty castles sounds like a waste, wait until you see what Dubai spent 30 billion on. Moving on to number 2, the world islands, Dubai. When Earth dreams too big. Picture this. What if you could have a piece of every country in the world without ever leaving Dubai? That's exactly what the guys behind the World Islands were thinking. And somehow, they actually tried to build it. In the middle of the Persian Gulf, about 4 kilometers off Dubai's coast, lies the most ambitious construction project that should have worked but didn't. The idea was brilliant in its simplicity. Create a massive artificial archipelago that looks exactly like Earth when viewed from space. Want to visit France? Just hop on a boat to the France island. Craving some pasta? Head over to Italy. It would be like having a global vacation package, but with the added bonus of being completely artificial. The developers started construction in 2003, dumping millions of tons of sand and rock into the Persian Gulf to create these islands. We're talking about 300 islands shaped like continents, countries, and cities. Everything from a tiny Luxembourg island to a massive Asia island. The total cost? A cool 30 billion. That's more than the GDP of some countries, spent on making fake countries. The project was supposed to be finished by 2008, just in time for Dubai's big economic boom. But then 2008 hit. The global financial crisis arrived like an unwanted house guest. And suddenly, nobody had 20 million lying around to buy a private island shaped like their home country. Here's where things get even messier. The islands started sinking back into the sea. Turns out, building artificial islands on loose sand in the middle of the ocean isn't exactly the most stable idea. Some islands sank as much as 10 feet below sea level. By 2015, only a handful of islands were developed. The Lebanon island became a resort, and there are a few others with hotels and restaurants. But most of the world? It's just empty sandbars slowly disappearing back into the ocean. Nature, it seems, had other plans. If you think building fake countries in the ocean is crazy, just wait until you see what North Korea built in the middle of their capital. Moving on to number 3. Ryugyong Hotel, North Korea. The pyramid that never opens. Now let's head to one of the most mysterious buildings on Earth. The Ryugyong Hotel in Pyongyang, North Korea. Standing 105 stories tall with the shape of a giant pyramid, this concrete giant has been staring at the sky for over 30 years without ever welcoming a single guest. Picture the world's biggest pyramid, but instead of housing pharaohs and ancient treasures, it holds nothing but empty rooms and awkward silence. That's Ryugyong, which translates to Hotel of Souls People, despite the building being in Pyongyang. Irony, we think so too. Construction began in 1987 during North Korea's brief economic boom. The North Koreans were feeling pretty confident. They wanted to build the tallest hotel in the world to show off their engineering prowess. They even hired Soviet engineers to help design it. The plan was ambitious: 105 floors, 3,000 rooms, and enough restaurants to feed a small army. But then 1991 arrived. The Soviet Union collapsed like a house of cards. And suddenly, North Korea's money printer ran out of ink. The construction stopped overnight, leaving a 334-meter concrete pyramid sitting in the center of Pyongyang like a modern Stonehenge. For 13 long years, the building stood as an empty concrete shell. No windows, no interior work, just a giant pyramid-shaped monument to unrealized dreams. Locals started calling it the Ghost Pyramid, and it became so famous that it was featured in movies as a symbol of failed ambition. Here's the crazy part: they actually tried to finish it. In 2008, an Egyptian sea telecom company came in with money to complete the hotel. They added some glass panels to make it look less like a concrete tomb and more like an actual building. But after spending all that money, they still haven't opened it to guests. If you think waiting 30+ years for a hotel to open is extreme, wait until you see the $100 billion city that's completely empty. Moving on to number 4, Forest City, Malaysia, the $100 billion ghost city. Deep in southern Malaysia, rising from the waters of the Johor Strait, stands Forest City, a massive futuristic complex that looks like it was designed by someone who watched too many sci-fi movies and had unlimited money to throw at concrete and glass. Picture the most advanced eco-city you can imagine. LEED-certified buildings reaching toward the sky, vertical gardens climbing up every surface, and clean energy powering everything. Now picture this city completely empty, like the set of a movie about the future that nobody bothered to finish filming. This wasn't supposed to be a ghost town. The developers spent $100 billion, yes, you heard that right, $100 billion, creating a city that was meant to house 700,000 people across 4 artificial islands. They built everything: luxury condos, shopping centers, schools, hospitals, even golf courses. The marketing promised living in harmony with nature and showcased cutting-edge sustainable technology that would make the world's green cities jealous. But then, reality hit like a freight train. The Chinese government imposed capital controls, meaning the wealthy Chinese buyers who were supposed to move here suddenly couldn't get their money out of China. Plus, Malaysian government policies changed, making it harder for foreigners to own property there. Suddenly, the buyers vanished like smoke. Today, Forest City stands as Southeast Asia's most expensive ghost town. Some towers have occupancy rates as low as 2%. You can walk through pristine lobbies designed for thousands of residents and see maybe a handful of people. The swimming pools are crystal clear, but completely empty. The golf courses are perfectly manicured but haunted by silence. What's even more shocking, construction continues on some parts of the project, even though most of it remains empty. It's like building new wings in a house where nobody lives. Now, let's head to Venezuela, where one skyscraper tells the story of an entire country. Moving on to number 5, Torre de David, Venezuela, the vertical slum. Here's a story that will break your heart and blow your mind at the same time. Torre de David in Caracas, Venezuela. This 45-story unfinished skyscraper became the world's most extreme example of urban improvisation, where squatters turned architectural abandonment into a vertical city. Picture this. A gleaming tower was supposed to be a modern office complex, the crown jewel of Caracas's financial district. Then Venezuela's economy collapsed, the developer died, and construction stopped at 35 floors. Most buildings would just sit empty, but not this one. Within months, desperate families turned this concrete shell into something extraordinary. Imagine living in an apartment with no walls, no elevator, and no regular access to running water, but views that would make penthouse dwellers jealous. That's exactly what happened here. Families built makeshift walls, rigged up precarious electrical systems, and even created a tiny elevator using pulleys and ropes. They installed a church on the 28th floor, a medical clinic on the 15th floor, and grocery stores throughout the building. The numbers are staggering. At its peak, 3,000 people called this unfinished skyscraper home. They created an entire society, complete with markets, schools, and even a daycare center, all in a building that was never meant to house anyone. Here's what makes this both incredible and tragic. These weren't just squatters finding shelter. They were people demonstrating that when traditional systems fail, humans will create new ones. A Venezuelan engineer even designed a water distribution system that worked better than many formal neighborhoods' systems. But then, in 2014, the Venezuelan government decided to clear everyone out, claiming safety concerns. It was like watching the last survivors of a sinking ship being forced back onto the deck. As we move from economic disasters to atomic nightmares, things are about to get even more extreme. Moving on to number 6, Chernobyl's unfinished siblings, the nuclear twin towers. Now we're diving into section 2, the atomic graveyards. If you thought empty castles and ghost cities were shocking, get ready for something that makes those look like a backyard barbecue gone wrong. Picture the most infamous nuclear disaster site in human history, Chernobyl. Now imagine discovering that right next to the exploded reactor, there are two more massive nuclear reactors sitting there, like ticking time bombs that never got the chance to explode. These aren't just any reactors, folks. Chernobyl reactors 5 and 6 were supposed to be the ultimate backup plan, the insurance policy against nuclear disaster. Construction began in 1981, with Reactor 5 nearly finished when Reactor 4 went supercritical and turned Ukraine into a nuclear wasteland in 1986. Here's where it gets absolutely mind-blowing. When the Chernobyl disaster happened, Reactor 5 was 95% complete. They were literally weeks away from loading nuclear fuel. Instead of powering a city, this massive reactor became one of the world's most expensive paperweights. Imagine walking through these colossal concrete structures today. Radioactive cranes still hang overhead, where workers left them 39 years ago. Cooling towers that were designed to handle radioactive steam now collect rainwater and house radioactive wildlife. We're talking about a nuclear facility that became a nature preserve for animals that glow. In the worst possible way. The Ukrainian government has been trying to decide what to do with these monsters since the disaster. Building a sarcophagus around them would cost billions. Demolishing them could release radioactive dust. So they're just sitting there, waiting, like nuclear landmines in a ghost town. Moving on to number 7, Juragua nuclear plant, Cuba, the Caribbean Chernobyl. Let's head south to Cuba, where communist dreams turned into nuclear nightmares. The Juragua nuclear plant in Cienfuegos makes the Chernobyl situation look like a controlled laboratory experiment. Picture this. The Soviet Union builds a nuclear power plant in tropical Cuba, a place where the summer heat is so intense that people melt just sitting in the shade. Now imagine why this seemed like a good idea in 1989. The Soviets were throwing money at Cuba like confetti at a parade. They spent $4 billion building 2 massive reactors that would power most of Cuba. The plan was perfect. Cuba would have cheap, abundant electricity, and the USSR would have a reliable ally in the Western Hemisphere. Everyone wins, right? Wrong. Just as Reactor 1 was about to go online in 1990, the Soviet Union collapsed like a house of cards in a hurricane. Overnight, the money train stopped. The engineers went home to find themselves unemployed in a country that no longer existed. The completed nuclear reactors sat there like expensive sculptures. For the next 20 years, these 30-story concrete monsters sat cooling themselves in the Caribbean heat, maintained by a skeleton crew of Cuban engineers who had no idea what they were doing. Equipment designed for Arctic conditions was baking in 100-degree weather. Spare parts became impossible to find. It was like trying to maintain a spaceship with tools from a hardware store. Here's the shocking truth. These nuclear reactors are still there. Still sitting still, radioactive. Still waiting. The Cuban government briefly considered completing them in the 2000s, but when they opened the containment building, they found everything corroded and unusable. If you think Cuba's nuclear nightmare sounds bad, wait until you hear about the Philippines' atomic white elephant. Moving on to number 8, Bataan Nuclear Plant, Philippines, the $5 billion tourist attraction. Welcome to Bataan Nuclear Plant, where expensive incompetence meets bureaucratic malpractice in the most spectacular way possible. This isn't just a nuclear plant that never worked. This is a nuclear plant that never even tried to work. Picture spending $5 billion to build a nuclear power plant, putting nuclear fuel rods in a submarine to ship them to the Philippines, then deciding not to use them because, well, honestly, nobody seems to remember exactly why. Here's the timeline that'll make your head spin. Construction began in 1976 under President Ferdinand Marcos, who was so obsessed with nuclear power that he personally toured 3 Mile Island in Pennsylvania and said, "I want one of these, but bigger." They hired the same company that built 3 Mile Island. Because if there's one thing you want, it's to hand the nuclear keys to the architects of the closest nuclear disaster America had seen. For 10 years, they poured concrete, installed nuclear equipment, and built cooling systems. They even imported nuclear fuel from the US and shipped it across the Pacific Ocean. Then, in 1986, a little thing called the People Power Revolution happened. Marcos fled to Hawaii. The new government took one look at this $5 billion nuclear nightmare and said, absolutely not. But here's the insane part. They kept maintaining it. For 30 years, the Philippines has been paying $20 million annually to keep this nuclear plant in ready condition. Ready for what? Nobody knows. The fuel was never loaded. The reactor was never tested. But they keep it pristine like a museum exhibit. The plant is located near a volcano in an earthquake zone, right next to Manila Bay, where typhoons make landfall. It's like they intentionally chose every possible nuclear disaster scenario and said, "Yep, that works for us." Today, it's the world's most expensive tourist attraction. You can take guided tours of a nuclear reactor that was never turned on for $4 billion per person. It's like visiting a nuclear theme park where the rides don't work and everything costs $4 billion. As we head to the United States, get ready for a nuclear disaster that was completely preventable. Moving on to number 9. Satsop Nuclear Plant, USA. The $24 billion echo chamber. In rural Washington state, about an hour from the Pacific Ocean, stands the Satsop nuclear plant, a monument to American nuclear ambition that went so spectacularly wrong that it became a business park. Yes, you heard that right. A business park. Picture 2 massive cooling towers, each standing taller than the Statue of Liberty. But instead of cooling nuclear reactors, they're now serving as the world's most unusual office space. The irony is so thick you could cut it with a knife. This project started in the 1980s with a bold vision: build nuclear reactors that would power Seattle and Portland. Construction began with fanfare, and they spent a staggering $60 million. But that's where things started going sideways. The final cost, try $24 billion. That's a 40,000% budget overrun. These cooling towers cost more than some countries' GDPs. The nuclear industry had its heart in the right place. Clean energy, reliable power, jobs for the region. But then, reality hit harder than a Pacific storm. The energy crisis ended, making nuclear power expensive compared to natural gas. Regulatory requirements kept changing. Workers went on strike. It was like watching a Jenga tower made of money collapsing in slow motion. In 1994, after spending more money than most countries have, they simply stopped. The partially built nuclear reactors were abandoned, and the massive cooling towers became monuments to what happens when engineering ambition meets economic reality. But here's where this story gets weird. Instead of demolishing these 500-foot towers, the local county government bought them and turned them into something called the Satsop Business Park. Today, you can rent office space inside these massive concrete structures. They even offer guided tours where you can hear the incredible acoustic echo of the interior. From American nuclear failures to Spanish terrorism, our next story involves the longest nuclear plant construction in history. Moving on to number 10, Lemoniz Nuclear Plant, Spain, the fortress that never worked. Deep in the Basque countryside of Spain stands Lemoniz Nuclear Plant, a massive concrete fortress that's been sitting empty for over 40 years, guarded by soldiers and surrounded by razor wire like some kind of nuclear Alcatraz. Picture the most fortified nuclear plant in the world, complete with military guards, concrete barriers, and enough security to protect a small country. Now picture why they needed all that protection. This plant wasn't just abandoned because of money problems. It was abandoned because of terrorism. In 1978, just as construction was getting underway, the Basque separatist group ETA made it very clear that they were going to do everything in their power to stop this nuclear project. They meant it. Here's where this gets absolutely insane. In 1981, ETA terrorists kidnapped the nuclear plant's chief engineer, Alberto Garcia Perez. They held him hostage for 2 months, then murdered him and left his body in a car trunk. The message was crystal clear. We will kill anyone who works on this nuclear plant. The assassination worked. Construction stopped immediately. The nuclear plant became too dangerous to complete. But here's the thing that defies logic. They kept building the physical structures. For another decade, workers continued building the massive concrete containment buildings and cooling systems while living under military protection. It was like building a house while being under siege. Today, these fortress-like structures sit there like monuments to extreme measures. The Spanish government has been spending millions annually to maintain these empty nuclear fortresses. Guards still patrol the perimeter. The equipment inside remains precisely as it was when construction stopped in the 1980s. As we move from nuclear disasters to victims of geopolitics and war, get ready to see how political conflicts freeze entire cities in time. Moving on to number 11, Nicosia International Airport, Cyprus, the time capsule airport. Welcome to Section 3, the victims of geopolitics and war. If you thought nuclear disasters were extreme, get ready to see how international conflicts can freeze entire cities in time for over 50 years. Picture this. You're an airport serving one of the world's most beautiful Mediterranean islands, handling flights from London, Athens, and Berlin. Then one day, soldiers from a neighboring country drive through your terminal, take over your runways, and suddenly your airport becomes part of a militarized no-man's land. That's exactly what happened to Nicosia International Airport in 1974. On August 14, 1974, Turkish forces invaded Cyprus during a political crisis. They drove straight through the airport's terminal, taking control of the runway and everything else. Passengers literally had to abandon planes mid-landing and run for their lives. It was like being in a war movie, except it was real life and everyone was terrified. The most shocking part, this airport has been sitting there, frozen in time, for 51 years. When you walk through the abandoned terminal today, it's like walking into a 1970s time capsule. Check-in counters are still marked with airlines that no longer exist. Flight departure boards show flights to London and Munich from 1974. There are still coffee cups on tables, newspapers from decades ago, and entire shops stocked with products from the disco era. Military vehicles still sit on the tarmac where they were abandoned during the invasion. A plane from 1974 remains exactly where it was parked when the soldiers arrived. The control tower hasn't seen an air traffic controller in over half a century. This isn't just an abandoned building. It's a United Nations buffer zone. The airport sits exactly on the green line that divides the Greek Cypriot south from the Turkish Cypriot north. For 50 years, it's been a no-man's land where soldiers from both sides patrol and civilians are forbidden to enter. Moving on to number 12, Jonglei Canal, South Sudan, the world's biggest dead excavator. Now we're heading to the heart of Africa, where civil war turned the world's most ambitious canal project into an expensive graveyard of broken dreams. Welcome to Jonglei Canal, where a single massive excavator became a monument to dreams that died in violence. Picture the longest river in the world, the Nile. flowing through some of the most remote and challenging terrain on Earth. Now picture the Sudanese government deciding in the 1970s that they wanted to build a massive canal to divert part of the Nile's flow, cutting through hundreds of miles of African wilderness. This wasn't just any canal project. We're talking about a waterway that would have been longer than the Panama Canal, designed to shorten the Nile's journey by 650 miles and create new farmland for thousands of families. It was so ambitious that they imported the world's largest land excavator from the Soviet Union. A massive machine the size of a small building that could dig trenches 30 feet deep and 300 feet wide. In 1983, when the project was already 25% complete, South Sudan erupted into civil war. The Sudan People's Liberation Army, fighting for independence, realized that this canal would change the entire water supply for the region. They saw it as a threat to their people's survival. So they did what rebels do. They attacked the project. But here's where this gets absolutely wild. During one of the attacks, the rebels didn't just destroy equipment or disrupt construction. They literally captured the world's largest excavator. That's right. One of the most powerful pieces of machinery ever created was hijacked by Sudanese rebels and used as a… well, nobody's really sure what they used it for. After the rebels captured Sarah, yes, that massive excavator had a name, construction stopped completely. The partially completed canal stretches across the African landscape like a massive scar. 245 miles of partly dug channel that runs from one abandoned camp to another. Sarah sits abandoned in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by grass and rust. Today, 40 years later, that massive excavator is still there. Somewhere in the South Sudanese wilderness lies one of the most expensive boat anchors in history, worth more money than most countries spend on education for entire years. If you think one excavator left to rust is extreme, wait until you see what happens when an entire Soviet mining town gets abandoned in the Arctic. Moving on to number 13, Pyramiden Svalbard, the communist time capsule. We're now heading to one of the most remote places on Earth, the Arctic island of Svalbard, halfway between Norway and the North Pole, where an entire Soviet mining town was abandoned and left to freeze in time. Welcome to Pyramiden, the world's most perfectly preserved example of what happens when a superpower abandons its most remote outposts. Picture a small town that looks like someone took a perfect Soviet neighborhood and immediately put it in cryogenic sleep. Every building, every street, every detail was left exactly as it was when the last Soviet miners packed up and left in 1998. This wasn't just a mining town. It was a Soviet showpiece designed to prove that communism could thrive even in the harshest environments on Earth. The Soviets built everything. Luxury apartment complexes with indoor heating, a grand hotel with marble floors, a sports complex with Olympic-sized swimming pools, even a cultural center with a theater and concert hall. But then the Soviet Union collapsed. And suddenly nobody wanted to pay for heating buildings in the Arctic. The last 600 miners and their families boarded a ship in Niayate and sailed away, leaving behind a town that looked like it was just waiting for Monday morning. The result is absolutely mind-blowing. Walk through Pyramiden today and you'll find a museum-quality Soviet time capsule. Soviet flags still hang in assembly halls. Lenin statues stand in town squares, surrounded by wild Arctic foxes that have made the abandoned buildings their homes. In the hotel lobby there's a piano that hasn't been played in 26 years, but still sits perfectly tuned thanks to the freezing Arctic air. The economic irony is delicious. This town was built to demonstrate the superiority of Soviet communism. But the Norwegian government now makes millions of dollars bringing tourists to see the abandoned communist utopia. It's like visiting a theme park where the Soviet Union didn't collapse. Except it did. And this is the real thing. From Arctic ghost towns to former spy stations, our next story involves an NSA listening post that became a graffiti-covered playground. Moving on to number 14, Teufelsberg, Germany, the NSA's abandoned ears. In the hills overlooking Berlin, on top of a mountain made entirely of rubble from World War II, sits one of the most unusual abandoned spy stations in the world. Welcome to Teufelsberg, where the NSA's most advanced listening post in Europe became an urban explorer's paradise covered in graffiti and filled with ghosts. Picture this. It's 1961, the Cold War is heating up, and the Americans need a place to spy on the entire Eastern Bloc. They spot a 120-meter hill in West Berlin that gives them perfect line of sight to Moscow. But there's just one problem. This hill isn't a natural mountain. It's a massive pile of rubble from buildings destroyed during World War II. The solution? Build the world's most advanced listening station on top of a giant pile of debris. It was like building a spaceship on a garbage dump. But somehow it worked brilliantly. For 45 years, Teufelsberg was the NSA's crown jewel in Europe. It had massive radio dishes that could intercept Soviet communications from hundreds of miles away. The facility was so secret that even the West German government wasn't allowed inside. American technicians lived and worked in this concrete fortress, listening to everything happening in the Eastern Bloc. But then, the Berlin Wall fell in 1989. And suddenly, this Cold War listening post became as useful as a snow cone in a heat wave. The NSA packed up their equipment and left, but instead of demolishing the facility, they just abandoned it. Today, Teufelsberg is the world's most unusual tourist attraction. Imagine walking through massive radar domes covered in street art, exploring empty dormitories where American spies once slept, and climbing up radio towers that once listened to Soviet secrets. The building is now a labyrinth of graffiti-covered rooms where urban artists have turned Cold War technology into their canvas. Every surface is covered with murals, and the acoustic echo chambers in the radar domes have become sound installation art. From Berlin's spy stations to Japan's industrial ghost towns, get ready for the most dramatic overnight abandonment in history. Moving on to number 15, Hashima Island, Japan. The battleship that died overnight. We end section 3 with one of the most dramatic stories of industrial abandonment in human history. Welcome to Hashima Island, Japan, also known as Battleship Island, where 5,000 people lived, worked, and then completely disappeared overnight. Picture a tiny island in the East China Sea, measuring just 480 meters wide and covered in what looks like a massive concrete battleship hull. For 75 years, this island was one of the most densely populated places on Earth, housing coal miners and their families in the world's most extreme urban environment. This wasn't just any mining operation. Hashima Island was owned by Mitsubishi and was the world's largest coal mine. The Japanese government was so proud of it that they put the island on their 500 yen banknote. But here's where this gets absolutely insane. In 1974, the mine was still profitable and expanding. Then, one day in January, the company announced that the mine was closing. Not gradually, not in phases, immediately. In 24 hours, every single person on the island was evacuated. By the end of that week, 5,000 people were gone, leaving behind 1,400 apartment buildings, schools, hospitals, theaters, and shops, all perfectly maintained but completely empty. This wasn't economic necessity, it was corporate planning. Mitsubishi had discovered oil was replacing coal, and they wanted out before it became obvious. They shipped everyone to other locations and locked the island down so completely that even Japanese citizens were forbidden from visiting. The result? For 40 years, Hashima Island sat there like a concrete monument to the industrial age, completely abandoned, slowly crumbling and looking exactly like it did the day everyone left. Windows intact, furniture still in place, school bells ready to ring, if there were any children left to hear them. As we move from abandoned cities to technological nightmares, get ready for the future that never happened. Moving on to number 16, the Aerotrain, France, the hovercraft train that never got to ride. Welcome to Section 4, Visions of the Future. If you thought abandoned cities and nuclear disasters were extreme, get ready to see how technology can make promises so big that reality couldn't deliver them. Picture this: a train that doesn't touch the tracks, floating on a cushion of air, traveling at 250 miles per hour through the French countryside. That's exactly what the French government was betting on in the 1960s. Meet the Aerotrain, the hover train that was supposed to revolutionize transportation and make the rest of the world look like they're still riding horse-drawn carriages. The idea was genius in its simplicity. Instead of wheels rolling on rails, build a train that floats on air using the same principles as a hovercraft. No friction, no maintenance, no limits on speed. They built a massive concrete T-shaped track stretching for miles through the forests north of Paris, and even constructed a prototype train that looked like something out of a 1960s sci-fi movie. For 8 years, the French government poured money into this flying train experiment. Engineers tested the Aerotrain at speeds that would make today's bullet trains jealous. It was floating, gliding, practically flying. And then suddenly, in 1974, everything stopped. Why? Politics and budget cuts killed the dream. The French government had to choose between this experimental hover train and a traditional high-speed rail system. They chose the TGV, which became the world's first high-speed train and changed transportation forever. But that meant the Aerotrain became a very expensive parking lot. Today, you can drive through the French countryside and see these impossible concrete tracks stretching through forests like something from a dystopian movie. The elevated T-rails stand 6 feet tall and stretch for miles, leading to absolutely nowhere. They're so solid that they're still there 50 years later, a monument to a future that never happened. If you think French hover trains sound like science fiction gone wrong, wait until you see what the Soviet Union built for space travel. Moving on to number 17, Buran Hangars, Kazakhstan, the Soviet space shuttle graveyard. In the middle of the Kazakhstan desert, on the same launch pad where Yuri Gagarin launched into space, lies one of the most unusual abandoned places on Earth, the Buran program facilities. Welcome to where the Soviet Union's space shuttle dream turned into the most expensive rust collection in Central Asia. Picture this: the Cold War is at its peak, and the Soviets are determined to match every American achievement in space. When NASA builds a space shuttle, the USSR responds by building their own version, called Buran. But while NASA built 2 shuttles, the Soviets built something much more ambitious and much more expensive. The Buran program wasn't just about shuttles. It was about building the world's most advanced space program. They constructed massive underground facilities, underground launch complexes, and facilities designed to handle space shuttles that were larger than anything NASA ever built. The facilities were so advanced that they included underground nuclear blast-proof command centers and maintenance facilities that could handle the desert's extreme temperatures. The irony is absolutely delicious. The Soviets spent $20 billion, that's more than NASA's entire Apollo program budget, building facilities that would launch maybe 20 flights. Then the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, just as the Buran program was getting started. Here's where things get completely insane. The Soviets completed 1 Buran shuttle, flew it once in 1988, and that was it. The program was cancelled the next year, but the facilities remained, massive concrete and steel monuments to a space program that never got to happen. Today, these facilities are a partially collapsed junkyard of Soviet ambition. The massive space shuttle hangar roofs have caved in, crushing the few remaining Buran shuttles underneath tons of concrete and steel. The underground facilities are flooded with groundwater, and everywhere you look, you see the rusted remains of equipment designed for missions that never flew. From space shuttles crushed under collapsing roofs to particle accelerators that never found particles. Get ready for the most expensive hole ever dug. Moving on to number 18. Superconducting Super Collider, USA. The $24 billion tunnel. Deep under the Texas countryside, stretching 14 miles in a perfect circle, lies one of the most expensive holes ever dug by humans. The Superconducting Super Collider. Welcome to where American scientific ambition met congressional reality in the most spectacular way possible. Picture this. In 1987, American physicists decided they wanted to build the most powerful particle accelerator in the world, something that would make Europe's Large Hadron Collider look like a toy. The SSC was supposed to be a circular tunnel 54 miles around and 300 feet underground, powered by 10,000 superconducting magnets, cooled to temperatures colder than outer space. This wasn't just a science project. This was America's statement to the world. We can out-science anyone. The project employed 2,500 scientists, engineers, and technicians. They built one of the world's most advanced physics laboratories in a field in Texas. Everything was going perfectly according to plan, except for one tiny detail: the cost. The original budget was $4.4 billion. That wasn't just a budget overrun. That was like planning to buy a car and ending up with a bill for a luxury cruise ship. Congress had enough. In '93, they cancelled the project, leaving behind 14 miles of perfectly built underground tunnels, complete with particle accelerator equipment that cost more than most countries spend on education in a decade. Today, those tunnels are filled with groundwater, and the surface facility looks like something from a sci-fi movie about abandoned scientific experiments. The cooling systems still hum with electricity, even though there's nothing left to cool. The accelerator magnets still line the tunnel walls, creating a perfect monument to dreams that died when the funding ran out. From American scientific dreams to Taiwanese UFO vacations. Get ready for something truly bizarre. Moving on to number 19, Wanli UFO Village, Taiwan. The flying saucers that never took off. On a beautiful hillside overlooking Taiwan's east coast, surrounded by ocean views and mountain ranges, lies one of the world's most unusual abandoned vacation resorts. Welcome to Wanli UFO Village, where 100 futuristic UFO-shaped vacation pods were supposed to house tourists seeking the ultimate out-of-this-world experience. Picture this. It's 1978, and a Taiwanese developer has a vision that's literally out of this world. Instead of building normal hotels or cabins, he wants to create a resort where guests stay in authentic-looking flying saucers, complete with round windows, smooth curves, and a color scheme that screams extraterrestrial tourism. The concept was brilliant in its simplicity. People would drive up to this mountain resort, check into their individual UFO pods, and enjoy a vacation that felt like being abducted by friendly aliens. Each pod had everything a hotel room would have: beds, bathrooms, even tiny kitchens, but shaped like something you'd expect to see hovering over Area 51. For 3 years, construction crews worked to build these 50-foot diameter vacation pods. They dug foundations for 100 individual UFOs, poured concrete bases, and started building the distinctive curved walls and windows. The developer spent millions creating what would have been the world's first UFO-themed resort. But then 1980 hit, and the global economy crashed. Oil prices skyrocketed. And suddenly, nobody had money for fancy vacation experiences. The developer ran out of cash and construction stopped. Half-finished UFOs sat on concrete foundations like abandoned art projects. Today, you can walk through this hillside graveyard of flying saucers and see something that's both haunting and oddly beautiful. Some UFOs are half-built, with concrete shells and exposed rebar. Others have corrugated metal siding that gives them a very earthly appearance. The whole site has been taken over by nature, with vines growing over the UFO shells and trees sprouting from their interiors. From UFO pods overgrown with vines to American subway systems that never saw trains, get ready for some major infrastructure failures. Moving on to number 20, Cincinnati Subway, USA, the underground ghost town. Welcome to Section 5, Infrastructure Ghosts. If you thought abandoned airports and UFO villages were extreme, get ready to see how entire cities can build subway systems underground and then never use them. Picture this. You're a major American city in the 1920s, and everyone knows that subways are the future of urban transportation. Cities like New York and Chicago have massive subway systems, and you don't want to be left behind. So you decide to build the most modern subway system possible, complete with beautiful Art Deco stations, state-of-the-art tunnels, and the latest in transportation technology. You spend millions of dollars building it, and then never run any trains. That's exactly what happened in Cincinnati. In the 1920s, the city decided to build a comprehensive subway system to connect neighborhoods across the Ohio River. They dug massive tunnels, built beautiful underground stations with tilework and chandeliers, and installed track systems that would have served the city for decades. The construction was so advanced that it's still considered engineering marvels today. But then, the Great Depression hit in 1929. By 1931, the city ran out of money, with the subway system 60% complete. World War II followed, and then the interstate highway system, which made everyone forget about public transportation. Instead of scrapping the project, Cincinnati just left it there. Today, you can walk through Cincinnati's underground and find a perfectly preserved Art Deco subway system that's been sitting empty for 90 years. The tunnels are still structurally sound. The stations are still beautiful and the track beds are still there. Some sections are filled with water, creating underground pools that urban explorers kayak through. Others are filled with bats that have made these abandoned tunnels their permanent home. The city has thought about reopening it many times, but the cost would be enormous. So for now, it's just America's most beautiful abandoned subway system, complete with vintage advertising and perfectly preserved architecture. Moving on to number 21, Cape Town. Foreshore freeways, South Africa, the bridge to nowhere. In the heart of Cape Town, South Africa, sitting exactly between the harbour and the city centre, lies one of the most unusual highway engineering disasters in the world. Welcome to the foreshore freeways, where highway construction stopped mid-sentence and left drivers hanging literally in mid-air. Picture this. It's 1970 and Cape Town is booming. The city decides to build a massive highway system to connect the harbour with the rest of the city, complete with multi-level bridges and flyover systems. The engineers draw up ambitious plans for elevated highways that would tower over the harbour and connect seamlessly with the city streets below. It's going to be the most impressive urban highway system in Africa. Construction begins with great fanfare. Workers build massive concrete pillars, start constructing elevated highway sections, and create the framework for what would become a modern transportation hub. Everything's going according to plan. And then suddenly, in 1977, the money runs out. The project is 70% complete, but there's no more funding. Here's where this gets absolutely mind-blowing. Instead of scrapping the unfinished highways or adjusting the design, Cape Town just stopped building them. Today, you can drive through Cape Town and see massive concrete bridges that start in the middle of buildings and end abruptly in mid-air. Some highways are just concrete shells without pavement. Others have on-ramps that lead to nothing but sky. These aren't small bridges. We're talking about massive multi-lane highways that cost hundreds of millions of rand to build and then just sit there. Local filmmakers use them for car chase scenes because they look like something from a dystopian movie. The city has tried several times to complete the project, but estimates now show it would cost more than the entire original project budget. If you think unfinished highways ending in mid-air sound like a waste, wait until you see what Spain spent on an airport for 200,000 people. Moving on to number 22, Ciudad Real Airport, Spain, the $1 million runway. In the heart of Spain's Castile-La Mancha region, about 2 hours south of Madrid, lies one of the most absurd infrastructure wastes in European history. Welcome to Ciudad Real Airport, where Spanish authorities spent over $1 billion to build one of Europe's longest runways for a city that never needed an airport. Picture this. It's 2001, Spain is hosting the World Cup, and the city of Ciudad Real thinks they're going to become a major international hub. Ciudad Real has a population of 75,000 people and a perfectly good airport in Madrid just 2 hours away. But that's not good enough. They want their own world-class airport with a 4,000-meter runway that can handle any aircraft in the world. The government spent £1 billion building what they called South Madrid Airport, complete with a terminal building designed to handle millions of passengers annually, massive parking facilities, and the longest runway in Europe at the time. The airport opened with great fanfare in 2001, just in time for the holidays and a surge of Christmas travelers. Here's the problem. Absolutely nobody came. The airport was located 2 hours from Madrid with no efficient transportation connections. Airlines had no interest in serving flights to a city of 75,000 people. The terminal was designed for millions of passengers, but saw maybe a few thousand per month. After struggling for 7 years, the airport finally closed in 2008 with debts of $300 million. Today, it stands as one of the most expensive abandoned airports in the world. The 4-kilometer runway is still perfectly paved, but it's marked with bright yellow crosses painted directly on the asphalt. The terminal building is empty except for the occasional film crew using it as a location for apocalyptic movies. The Spanish government sold the entire airport for just $80 million to a Chinese company that promised to turn it into a cargo hub. That never happened either. From Spanish airports marked with yellow crosses to Canadian terminals demolished in the night. Get ready for one of the most tragic airport failures in history. Moving on to number 23, Mirabel Airport Terminal, Canada. The $1 billion teardown north of Montreal in the rural countryside of Quebec sits one of the most unusual aviation disasters in North American history. Welcome to Mirabel Airport, where Canada spent $1 billion building what was supposed to be the world's largest airport terminal, then demolished most of it 30 years later. Picture this. It's 1975, and Canada wants to build an airport that will serve Montreal for the next century. They choose a location 55 kilometers from the city center because they want plenty of room for expansion. The terminal building will be so massive and modern that it makes airports around the world look outdated by comparison. They're even building a high-speed rail line to connect the airport with downtown Montreal. Construction begins with enormous fanfare. They're not just building an airport, they're building a monument to Canadian engineering prowess. The terminal is designed to handle 50 million passengers annually and has a futuristic design that looks like something from a 1970s science fiction movie. But here's where reality hits like a frozen freight train. When Mirabel Airport opened in 1975, Montreal was experiencing an economic downturn. Fewer people were flying, and businesses weren't expanding as predicted. Plus, the airport was 55 kilometers from downtown Montreal, meaning passengers had to spend 2 hours just getting to the airport. The high-speed rail was cancelled before construction even started. For 20 years, Mirabel operated as a white elephant, a massive airport designed for 50 million passengers that handled maybe 2 million annually. The airport was so empty that security guards would give guided tours, and you could hear echoes in the enormous terminal building. In 2004, after spending $300 million annually to maintain an underused airport, the Canadian government made a stunning decision. They would close the passenger terminal and move all flights to Montreal's smaller Dorval Airport. But here's the absolute insanity. Instead of demolishing the terminal building, they just abandoned it. Today, you can visit what remains of Mirabel Airport and see a massive concrete shell of what was supposed to be the world's most advanced airport. The terminal building was partially demolished, but much of it still stands as a monument to planning failures. The massive parking lots are empty except for the occasional commercial film crew using them for movies about abandoned airports. From Canadian airport terminals left to crumble to Amazon rubber plantations consumed by jungle, get ready for one of history's most expensive cultural clashes. Moving on to number 24, Fordlandia, Brazil, Henry Ford's Amazon disaster. Deep in the Amazon rainforest, surrounded by some of the most biodiverse ecosystems on Earth, lies one of the most spectacular cultural disasters in corporate history. Welcome to Fordlandia, where Henry Ford's dream of creating a rubber empire in Brazil turned into an expensive lesson about what happens when American industrial thinking meets Amazonian reality. Picture this. It's 1928, and Henry Ford is worried that rubber shortages during World War I will happen again. He's determined to create his own rubber plantations, but he doesn't want to rely on suppliers in Asia. So he buys 4,000 square miles of Amazon rainforest, an area nearly the size of Connecticut, and decides to build a perfect American town in the middle of the jungle, complete with American-style houses, lawns, and a downtown business district. This wasn't just a plantation. Ford envisioned creating a model American company town in the Amazon with air-conditioned buildings, a golf course, movie theaters, and even fire hydrants painted in Ford's signature blue. The first ship carrying American workers arrived with everything needed to build a slice of Detroit in the jungle. Here's where this gets absolutely bonkers. The Ford company spent $20 million, that's about $300 million today, building this American-style paradise. They planted American crops like wheat and tomatoes in soil that had never grown anything but jungle plants. They installed air conditioning units in buildings designed for Michigan winters. They built hamburger stands and baseball fields, and even a newspaper called Fordlandia News. The cultural clash was immediate and spectacular. The American workers couldn't handle the Amazon's heat, humidity, and insects. The local Brazilian workers weren't interested in American work schedules or eating habits. The crops died in the alien soil. The air conditioning broke down constantly. By 1934, the project was abandoned as a failure. Fordlandia wasn't just economically unsuccessful, it was a complete cultural disaster that demonstrated how assumptions about engineering and business could completely ignore local conditions and human nature. From Amazonian American towns overgrown with jungle to Argentine resort towns bleached white by receding water, our final story involves a tourist destination that became a ghostly monument to natural disasters. Moving on to number 25, Villa Epicuén, Argentina, the salt-covered city. We end our journey with one of the most visually stunning abandoned places on Earth. Villa Epecuén in Argentina sits about 500 kilometers south of Buenos Aires, where a beautiful lakeside resort town became a perfectly preserved monument to what happens when nature and planning collide in the most dramatic way possible. Picture this: a charming tourist destination on the shores of Lake Epecuén, popular with Buenos Aires families who wanted weekend getaways. The town had hotels, restaurants, shops, and vacation homes, everything you'd expect from a lakeside resort. It could host up to 5,000 visitors daily during peak seasons, and many families had vacation homes there. For decades, Villa Epecuén was a thriving tourist destination. But then, in 1985, the unthinkable happened. A dam upstream failed catastrophically, and instead of the normal seasonal water levels, Lake Epecuén began rising faster than anyone could imagine. The water rose 10 meters higher than ever recorded, completely submerging the entire town. Here's where this gets absolutely remarkable. The town was abandoned overnight, and the lake water stayed there for 25 years. Villa Epecuén disappeared completely underwater, becoming an underwater ghost town that was rarely discussed. Then, in 2010, something extraordinary happened. After decades of being submerged, the lake level began dropping dramatically due to drought conditions. The water receded, revealing what might be the world's most perfectly preserved, abandoned town, completely intact after 25 years underwater. When the water finally cleared, Villa Epecuén looked like something from a disaster movie set. Every building was perfectly preserved, but covered in a thick layer of white salt. Cars were still sitting in parking spaces, but they looked like they'd been spray-painted white. Trees stood exactly where they'd always been, but they were skeletal and white. The whole town looked like a photographer's wet dream, a completely intact ghost town with a hauntingly beautiful whitewashed appearance. As we conclude this journey through 25 of the world's most spectacular failures, remember this: these aren't just abandoned buildings. They're monuments to human ambition, proof that even with unlimited budgets and perfect intentions, the biggest dreams can collapse overnight. Folks, we've just taken a journey through some of humanity's most spectacular failures. From Disney castles rotting in Turkey to nuclear reactors frozen in time. From UFO vacation pods to underground subway systems that never saw a train. But here's what we learned from these 25 disasters. They all have something in common. Every single one of them started with a dream so big, so ambitious, that it seemed like magic was possible. Whether it was a Turkish businessman who thought he could sell 732 identical castles, or the North Koreans who built a pyramid hotel that never opened, or the Soviets who spent more money on space shuttles than NASA spent on the moon landing. They all believed that enough money could make impossible things happen. Here's the gut punch statistic that'll blow your mind. These 25 projects alone cost over $200 billion. That's enough money to feed every hungry child on Earth for an entire year, or to build 2,000 schools with the most advanced technology, or to provide clean water to every person who doesn't have access to it. But here's what makes this story beautiful instead of just depressing. These failures taught us exactly what not to do. Every collapsed bridge, every empty airport, every nuclear reactor that never worked. They became the map that guided better projects. They saved future generations from making the same expensive mistakes. And let's not forget the people behind these stories. The Turkish farmer who now grows vegetable between abandoned castles. The Cuban engineer who kept that nuclear plant running for decades, even when the Soviet Union no longer existed. The Nigerian workers who used abandoned subway tunnels to start businesses. These weren't just engineering failures. They were human stories of adaptation, resilience, and finding ways to make the best of the worst situations. But here's what should terrify you. As of 2025, some of the projects we just explored are still happening. Right now, somewhere in the world, someone is planning a mega project that will eventually become a YouTube video like this one. New ghost cities are being built in China. New nuclear reactors are being abandoned in Japan. New airports are being constructed in places that will never see enough passengers. Before you click away, I want to hear from you. Which of these abandoned mega projects shocked you the most? Were you stunned by the Disney Castle Valley in Turkey, the nuclear ghost towns, the UFO vacation pods in Taiwan? Drop a comment and tell me which one made you say, "There's no way this is real." And if you enjoyed this journey through the world's most expensive mistakes, smash that like button, because I'm already working on the next mind-blowing exploration. What do you want to see next? The world's most haunted places, the most dangerous cities on Earth, the most incredible survival stories of all time? Let me know in the comments. Here's a teaser. Next week, I'm taking you to places that are so dangerous that governments have built walls around them, but urban explorers risk their lives to visit them. Some of these locations are so toxic that a single breath could kill you. Others are so radioactive that you'll glow in the dark. And one of them is so secret that just looking at satellite images of it gets you on government watch lists. Sounds intense? Well, you just survived 200 billion worth of disasters. So I think you're ready. Hit that subscribe button, ring the notification bell, and I'll see you next week for another journey through the world's most extreme places. Because if there's one thing these 25 abandoned mega projects taught us, it's this. You never know what's waiting around the corner until you go looking for it. Thank you for joining me on this journey through 25 of humanity's most spectacular failures. Remember, sometimes the biggest mistakes lead to the most important lessons.